The castle loomed large on the hill just beyond the meadow, the stone appearing to weep as the rain cascaded down its parapets. The eerie silence filled her with dread as she passed through the portcullis into the courtyard. The boy led her onwards through the unnerving darkness, up the narrow stairway to where the silence was replaced by the unmistakable sounds of the dying. A girl several years older than the boy knelt by the bedside of a raven-haired woman, gaunt and bearing the rosy marks of typhoid fever. The baby in her arms held the same flush of coming death. "Please, heal her," wept the girl. "They cannot die. Gran just left us. We cannot lose them too." Though she could not save them either, she would do what she could to ease their journey into the afterlife. She instructed the boy to bring water while she crushed dried stems and leaves with her blistered hands. Leaning over the bed, she cradled the feeble woman's head and bid her drink the liquid, then wet the baby's lips with enough moisture to calm its labored breaths. Soon, they both closed their eyes and found a peaceful slumber. The children were thankful, but the healer sent them to bed knowing that the end was coming for them both. She settled into a chair in the corner of the room and waited. The storm and the dog days of searching left her exhausted, and soon sleep caught her as well. She awoke to the sun's first ray and the sound of silence. They had both perished in the night. Her heart was heavy, knowing that she must inform the children. But it was not the mistress's progeny that pushed open the heavy oaken door. The Lord looked upon his beloved departed wife, their silent babe, then caught the sight of the healer as she shot up out of her chair, overturning it in her fright.
"Bridget Cleary, you murderous witch! You have taken your last life!"
He bellowed, rounding the bed in one expansive lunge, and snatched her by the wrists. He dragged her from his late wife's bedchamber, ruthlessly down the stairs, summoning his guards as he trampled through the great hall. Outside, he threw her to the ground and spat on her.
"Take her to the river,"
he ordered.
"The sword is too good for her."
She struggled against the soldiers as they bound her, her mind solely on her little rosebud. "Royce and Dub, my heart forever beats within you," she screamed to the sky. The Lord's son awoke amidst the skirmish and ran outside.
"Father, where are they taking her? I brought her here to help Mammy and Baby Nod."
Nobleman struck the boy.
"You brought this filth into my fortress. Then you murdered my wife and my heir, Patrick Plunkett."
Patrick felt as though he had been battered a second time at his father's words, but he had no time for grief as the ogre clawed into his arm, lifting him from the ground and tossing him toward the meadow.
"So as ye brought this evil upon this house, so see ye it quashed, lest ye meet the same unholy end."
Lord Plunkett stomped back to his keep without another word. Though bleeding, the boy could not stop to cry for anyone. He knew that the healer did not bring his family's deaths. The plagues had come for years and people had died. Binlays had kept Gran alive well beyond natural years. Perhaps she was a witch, but he had never seen her bring harm to anyone. He had to do something. Her daughter could not be alone. But he was only 10. What could he do? He could not overpower them. He could not outwit them, though witless they be. He did not have to think. Just as they reached the river's edge, the air was suddenly filled with the terrible howl of the tremendous she-wolf. The guards drew their weapons and hunkered down, pushing poor Bridget into the dirt as they waited for the invisible onslaught. The pounding of immense paws boomed around them, impossible to tell where the attack was coming from. Patrick saw her first. He saw his chance. As Fia sailed over the riverbed without a sound into instant battle, he pulled the healer to her feet and tried to make her come with him, but she resisted.
We must go, healer. Rose needs you.
The boy removed the rag from Bridget's mouth to hear the words he did not want to hear her utter. She is not safe while I live, boy. Needs must. But she was cut short by the awful yelp that pierced through them both. Though the huntress had survived through years of brown, food-scarce summers and brutal winters of ice and wind, she had fallen in the defense of her mistress, struck down with blade through the heart. Bridget rushed to Fia's side and nuzzled her head as the healer's tears spilled silently onto her fur, the light disappearing from her eyes. There were no words to express her gratitude. Who would protect her rosebud as she grew into a woman? Who would provide for her without the prospect of a future husband? But the grief morphed into anger as the murderers ripped her away from the still bleeding corpse. That filthy beast of yours took a chunk out of my hide, the guard seethed, sporting a mangled bite wound that Bridget knew would never heal. Though her heart was a blaze of fury and torment, she smiled in his face, knowing that the wound was just beginning to fester. The damage will never heal. The rift is too deep. Then she turned to Patrick with a somberness, betraying the inferno within. Take her to my Rose. Take her home. Those last words were still heavy in the air as the raging guardsman threw an armor-clad forearm across the side of her head, knocking her like a rag doll into the water. Patrick cried out, sinking to his knees as he realized there was nothing to be done. She was dead before she hit the water. Laughing as her lifeless body bobbed in the meandering current, the heartless miscreants pulled at the boy to stand, but he would not move. The guards shrugged, leaving him to suffer in silence. Alone under the black, suffocating blanket of despair, grief washed over him, just as the waves washed the dead woman downstream like refuse. The light was disappearing fast. He knew that he must take the wolf home. He struggled to heave the body of the white huntress over his shoulder. The weight of both the wolf and what lay both behind and ahead was almost too much for him to bear. He could find no words to make his dreaded announcement palatable. As he entered the wood, the sun fell behind the trees, plunging the forest into absolute darkness. No moon rising to replace the golden orb. Weaving through the currents, the healer's body floated from bank to bank, tumbling over sunken limbs and jagged rocks. As the light faded, she drifted under the lightning-burned boughs of a gnarled, ancient wych elm. Though this was no ordinary tree, it was enchanted and hidden in plain sight by the woodland fairies. The roots hiding just below the surface of the waves gently lifted her limp form from the waters and wrapped her in its matronly branches, enveloping her within the sanctuary of its tomb-like hollow, forever safe from the brutal hand of man. Meanwhile, in the dark of the forest, Patrick spied the candlelight of the hut. He had not found the words to tell her what he needed to, but the flop of the wolf's body on the doorstep brought her running in expectation of her mother's return. The horror that met her evoked a sound from her that Patrick felt to his bone, the first sound she had uttered since she last saw him. He didn't know he was running until the light ebbed and he found himself in the darkness. He could not face her, for his fear made him complicit in her mother's demise. Not sure how he had found the hut to begin with, he had now lost his way. It was blackness in every direction. He leaned against the trunk of a pine, waiting for a sign to guide him from the gloom. Across the forest floor, the wych elm rustled in a windless sky as two red eyes blinked to life, a low wail rising to a fever-pitched shriek that shook every leaf in the forest. His heart leapt in his throat, and while he still could not decipher the sky from land, he ran until the eyes were no more than pinpoints, and the shriek faded into the din of the forest noises. And though the typhoid would soon take his sight but spare his life, those eyes and that shrill keen were forever emblazed upon his mind.
Fearing all manner of goose hags and rakes, mind you don't shut your eyes, lie still, lie silent until no priceless